if you're anything like me, then you had a very narrow view of trauma, childhood trauma. I know I did. Um, for a long time, most of my life, I refused, not even refused, I just didn't think that I had trauma. Um, because I was thinking of trauma as, I wasn't sexually abused. I wasn't physically harmed on a daily basis. Um, so I refused to think of myself as having childhood trauma. My mom, on the other hand, she was abandoned as a child and she was orphaned. So I looked at her like, okay, she had trauma. That's real trauma. But the thing is that I've come to learn that trauma has a much wider definition than what I had originally thought. So trauma, and specifically childhood trauma, is anything that happens to you in your childhood that you do not have the emotional capacity to handle. So therefore, that experience gets stored in your body, kind of gets filed in your body, and puts you into what they call a trauma response, which is, the 4 trauma responses are fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And you carry those stored memories of those experiences that you weren't able to handle when you were a child. You carry those into adulthood. And in adulthood, those unprocessed emotions, they create patterns within you where if there's a situation that reminds you of the situation that happened in childhood, then a trauma response happens. A fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response happens. My 2 trauma responses are freeze and fawn. And a trauma response is not anyone that's handled it, anyone that's been through it before, that it's not a fun thing to go through. It actually feels absolutely terrible and horrible. And it feels like you're about to die. It feels like, you need to fight for your life, or you need to run for your life, or you need to just freeze and hope that whatever the threat that's walking up to you passes by, or you need to fawn, which is you need to appease the threat so that it becomes friendly with you. And all of those trauma responses are results of the childhood trauma that you had when you were younger that is still unprocessed and is still coming up. So how does this tie into spirituality? I consider myself a spiritualist, for lack of a better word. I've had spiritual practice for years. Meditation, I meditate quite frequently. Positive thinking, I work on affirmations and thoughts. I'm very conscious of the thoughts that I put out into the universe. But I noticed that within my spiritual practice the past couple of years that I hit a roadblock. There was just something there that there was just a certain level, a spiritual level that I couldn't get through. It was like I felt like I had reached a spiritual ceiling. And then all of a sudden, my childhood trauma awoken in a very strong way. Very, very strong way. And what I learned and what I'm learning about spirituality and childhood trauma is that you can only go so far in your spiritual practice with unhealed or unprocessed trauma. And this is why. Because just like they say in the best-selling book right now, the body keeps the score. When it comes to trauma that's stored in the body keeps the score. Means that the body has a memory that never forgets about that unprocessed emotion and unprocessed trauma that you dealt with. Now, the reason why this kind of can clash with spirituality is because spirituality is all about kind of transcending the body. It's about spirit. It's about, you're more than your body. You leave the body behind. You're trying to lower your density, when it comes to spirituality. Many people approach it like that. I don't want to say many people approach it like that. I've approached it like that for years, which is when what tends to happen is that since you're trying so hard to meditate and, do spiritual work, you start having, it's almost like you have a lack of respect for your body. And the body feels this because the body keeps the score. And the body is here to remind you that, hey, you still have this going on. Don't try to escape what happened to you when you were 5 years old that you didn't process. Don't try to fly into, the sky, into the air. I'm still here. I still want that attention. So how do you give? What do I mean by that? What do I mean? I still want that attention. Your trauma wants to be healed because your childhood trauma is that little kid in you that was completely terrified and didn't have the resources to soothe himself or soothe herself, or to parent himself or parent herself. They were terrified. They disassociated for themselves. They stored that memory in the body for later, for you to process when you were ready as an adult. And if you continue as an adult to store that stuff away and file away your unprocessed trauma, the body will speak louder and louder. And the way it speaks to you is it speaks to you in illnesses. It speaks to you in tightness in certain areas. It speaks to you in sensations that feel uncomfortable. All of those things are the body trying to bring you back so that you can pay attention to what you did not have the capacity to pay attention to before.